Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Today's going to be a short podcast regarding choosing intensity, the right intensity for your strength training. Now, what I find is that most people either are lifting too heavy on a lot of their muscles or they're just going too light. Oftentimes, it's the real go-getters that are lifting a little too heavy to where they can be doing joint damage, they can damage tendons, they can cause too much damage to the muscle, and therefore the muscle isn't really going to grow well, or we're going to have joint problems and other issues that make it a net negative. Then you've got the people who just don't really pay much attention to how they're selecting intensity. This is often people going to boot camps and bar classes and yoga and things like that, where the weight selection is just very random. And they figure as long as I feel a burn, I must be doing some good. And what they're not realizing is just feeling a burn in and of itself does not mean that you've chosen the right intensity. So you've got the people over here, you've got the people over here. What we want is the sweet spot right in the middle that's going to make the most sense for you. And the way you go about determining this first is you need to have an estimation of that muscle group's one repetition max. All that means is what's the most amount of resistance, the absolute most that particular exercise for that muscle group can perform properly. So if we're talking about a bicep curl, it would mean, what's the most that I could possibly bicep curl all the way up and then slowly all the way down with proper form, proper breathing, etc. If you have a dumbbell in your hand and you're doing this and you're kind of moving around and struggling to make it work, that's not a repetition, right? That's really unsafe for your joints, especially. So if that's what you're dealing with, then that is too much weight. That is not your one repetition max. It's higher. And then again, if you're at a point where you can perform a weight more than once, a given resistance more than once, then that's not your one repetition max either. You would ultimately and hypothetically want to find the intensity that is the maximum you can perform for that particular exercise. All right, now you might be thinking, well, that seems kind of dangerous. And for some of you, it is. There are people who are strong enough and athletic enough and have good enough muscle balance where you can just use some trial and error and figure out what your one repetition max is that way. That's kind of a more old school way to do it. We have equations that can give you things like, for example, let's say you choose a weight at random and you're able to perform it 10 times with good form before your form starts to suffer. All right, well, if that's the case, you can use some of these equations and you can plug in that weight and the number of repetitions that you got on a given movement, and you'll get back a roundabout estimation of your one repetition max. And for some people, that's pretty darn accurate, and for some people, it's really inaccurate. It depends a lot upon some genetics, like your muscle fiber types, and also that data. It's somewhat flawed in the first place. It's not the most accurate mathematics to go about determining your one rep max. So the first thing I would tell you is if you're more advanced, go ahead, use your one rep max, actually find out what it truly is through trial and error. If you're someone who might have some weak joints or any history of back pain or who's kind of new in general to strength training, then we generally don't want to actually determine your one rep max by actually truly seeing it in practical form. Instead, what would make more sense for you is to use one of these equations for the time being. Now, once you've estimated that one repetition max, once you know about how strong you are on a given exercise, then we want to start considering what intensity is going to be appropriate. If you're a beginner, if you're detrained, if you have a history of back pain, shoulder dysfunction, poor nutrition, poor sleep, anything, then you're going to want to start at honestly around 50% or even less of your total strength. If you're someone who's a little bit more advanced, let's say you're still a beginner, but you're not that much of a beginner and you do get relatively good amounts of protein each day and you sleep fairly well throughout the night, then you're someone who could probably start at more like 50 to roughly 60%. And of course, if you've been at it for a few weeks, by that point, you're probably going to have some sets where you're up to 70, 75, maybe 80%. Anyway, the main takeaway I want you to have from this particular podcast is that your intensity matters a lot. And if you're not getting results, if you're not getting stronger or more endurant, then your intensity is probably not right. You can have other factors too, don't get me wrong. Your nutrition, your sleep, your hydration, your stress, all those other factors do certainly go into it. But ultimately, when it all comes down to it, intensity is generally considered to be the number one metric that's going to affect not only your safety, but your efficacy in terms of strength training. And of course, don't forget strength training is critical, not just for your confidence and for your sex life and for your energy levels, but also strength training and thereby gaining muscle mass onto your body is a huge panacea for all kinds of problems, for cardiorespiratory issues, for bone mineral density loss, for joint disorder, mobility issues, back pain, brain health, all kinds of things. So getting this intensity right is going to help you to get your strength training more right, and that's going to help you to get your life and your longevity and your health span more right as well. So as always, everybody, you can reach me if you want to work with me directly. I can give you much better advice once I know your health history, your medical history, and your current levels of fitness. Then we can talk a lot more in depth. You can reach out to me down below in the comments or go to one of my websites. They're all in the description here on the video. So go ahead and let me know what your questions are. Looking forward to your health and fitness success. Have a great one.